The CEO's wife invited this black janitor to a luxury party as a joke. She expected laughter. She expected humiliation. But when the CEO stood up to speak, the entire room froze. The ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel was already booked, the guest list carefully curated. CEOs, investors, politicians, and socialites who measured worth by titles and net worth. This party was meant to celebrate power, status, appearances, and Evelyn Carter loved appearances. But wait, before we begin, comment on where you are watching from, and please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff tomorrow. Comment "I subscribe" below and I will personally welcome you to our community, and comment on what you learn also. So, let's get started. As the CEO's wife, she thrived in rooms where everyone knew her name before she even spoke. She planned the party herself, obsessing over flower colors, lighting angles, and seating arrangements. Every detail mattered, especially who belonged there. That morning, as staff rushed through the office halls carrying decorations and champagne crates, Evelyn spotted him. A black man in his late 40s, quiet, always sweeping the same hallway near the executive floor. His uniform was neat, but faded, his movements calm, almost invisible. She had passed him hundreds of times without learning his name. Today, she stopped. She laughed softly to herself, an idea forming. "Wouldn't it be hilarious," she whispered to her assistant, "if he showed up tonight?" The assistant hesitated. "Ma'am?" Evelyn smirked. "The janitor. Imagine the looks on their faces." She waved her hand dismissively. "Send him an invitation. Make it look official. Let's see if he actually shows." The assistant froze. "Are you serious?" Evelyn's smile widened. "Relax. People like him know their place." Within minutes, a sleek black and gold invitation was printed. It bore the company crest, the date, the location, and one line at the bottom. Evelyn personally placed it on the janitor's cleaning cart as he worked silently nearby. "Invitation for you," she said lightly, her tone dripping with amusement. He looked up, surprised. "For me?" She nodded, already turning away. "Don't be late." She laughed with her friends later about it. "He won't come," she said confidently. "And if he does, well, it'll be entertaining." But upstairs in the CEO's office, David Carter watched from behind glass walls as the janitor picked up the invitation and read it slowly. David's jaw tightened. He knew exactly who that man was, and he knew what this night was truly about. Because this party wasn't just a celebration. It was a test. And everyone, especially his wife, was about to be judged. The janitor's name was Samuel Reed, but almost no one knew that. To most people in the building, he was just the cleaner. The man who came early and left late. The one who emptied trash cans, polished marble floors, and fixed what others broke without ever being thanked. Samuel stood alone in the hallway, holding the invitation carefully between his fingers. He read it once, then again. The paper was thick, expensive. His name was printed clearly. Samuel Reed. For a moment he wondered if it was a mistake. He glanced down the hall, half expecting someone to laugh and snatch it back. No one did. The hallway was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Samuel folded the invitation and placed it in his pocket. He went back to work. What no one noticed was the way his eyes lingered on the company crest, or the faint tightening of his jaw, or the fact that he didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't look confused. He looked thoughtful. That evening, long after most employees had gone home, Samuel sat alone in his small apartment. The invitation lay on the table beside a neatly folded suit, dark blue, modest, well-kept. He hadn't worn it in years. He ran his hand over the fabric, memories stirring. Rooms like the one described on the invitation. People dressed like that. Conversations about power, deals, and influence. He exhaled slowly. "They never learn," he murmured. Across town, the Meridian Grand Hotel buzzed with preparation. Chandeliers were polished, tables aligned perfectly, servers rehearsed smiles, everything had to be flawless. Evelyn Carter stood in the ballroom inspecting the setup like a general before battle. "Make sure the dance is clear," she said sharply. "That's where staff comes in." Someone laughed nearby. "Still thinking about your little joke?" Evelyn smiled. "I hope he shows up." She imagined the whispers, the sideways glances, the quiet humiliation. It amused her. What she didn't notice was her husband standing near the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. David Carter checked his watch. He had given Samuel a choice: come or don't. But either way, the test had already begun. And tomorrow night, when the doors opened and the guests arrived, something far more important than status would be revealed. Because Samuel Reed wasn't deciding whether he belonged at the party. He was deciding whether they did. David Carter had built his reputation on control. Every deal, every negotiation, every boardroom conversation, measured, deliberate, precise. People believed he was calm because he was confident. The truth was simpler. He observed before he acted. That morning, David stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, watching the city move beneath him. The party was less than 24 hours away, yet his mind wasn't on investors or speeches. It was on Samuel Reed. Down the hall, David spotted him through the glass walls, pushing a cleaning cart, wiping fingerprints from office doors no one else cared about. Samuel moved with patience, not haste, as if time didn't rush him the way it rushed everyone else. Evelyn entered the office without knocking. "Everyone's talking about the party," she said brightly. "This is going to be the event of the year." David nodded, eyes still on the hallway. "Is it?" She frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he replied. "Just thinking." Evelyn waved it off. "Oh, and I invited the janitor." David turned slowly. "You did what?" She laughed. "Relax. It's harmless. I wanted to see if he'd actually show up." David's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his eyes. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Why? He's just a janitor." The words hung in the air longer than she expected. David stepped closer. "You'd be surprised what people are if you actually look," she scoffed. "Don't tell me you're defending him." "I'm telling you," David said, voice calm but firm, "that tomorrow night matters more than you think." Evelyn studied him, unsettled by his tone. "What is that supposed to mean?" David didn't answer. Instead, he walked out of the office and down the hall, stopping as Samuel passed. "Good evening," David said. Samuel paused. "Good evening, sir." Their eyes met, an exchange unnoticed by everyone else. There was respect there. And something else. Understanding. "I hope you'll be joining us tomorrow," David said. Samuel gave a small nod. "I'll be there." David smiled for the first time that day. As Samuel continued down the hall, Evelyn watched from the doorway, confusion flickering across her face. Why was her husband speaking to him like that? And why did she suddenly feel like the joke she started was no longer hers to control? Tomorrow night would answer that. All right, the tension is set. Now we turn up the pressure. Here is Chapter 4, designed to keep viewers glued. Chapter 4, When Power Laughs. The night of the party arrived wrapped in luxury. Crystal chandeliers lit the Meridian Grand Hotel like a palace. Black cars lined the entrance. Valets opened doors for men in tailored suits and women draped in silk and diamonds. Laughter spilled into the street, sharp and confident. Inside, Evelyn Carter stood at the center of it all. She wore a red gown that demanded attention, her smile flawless, her posture perfect. Guests surrounded her, compliments flowing as freely as the champagne. "This is incredible, Evelyn," someone said. "You outdid yourself again," said another. She soaked it in. Then someone leaned close and whispered, "So, did your little guest show up?" Evelyn smirked. "Not yet, but there's still time." At the far end of the ballroom, staff moved silently, trays balanced, eyes down. Evelyn watched them the way one watches furniture, useful, unnoticed. Her eyes flicked toward the service entrance. Nothing. She laughed softly. "Of course, I knew he wouldn't come." But just then, the doors opened. Not the grand front doors, the side entrance. A hush rippled through the room like a disturbance no one could explain. Samuel Reed stepped inside. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. He wore a simple dark suit, neatly pressed, shoes polished to a dull shine. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. But he stood straight, shoulders calm, eyes steady. Whispers erupted instantly. "Who is that? Is he staff? Did someone let a janitor in?" Evelyn's smile froze. Her eyes locked onto Samuel like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh my God," she muttered. "He actually came." A few guests chuckled nervously. Others stared openly. Some turned away, embarrassed on his behalf. Samuel walked forward slowly, each step measured, unhurried. Evelyn recovered quickly. She crossed the room with practiced grace, intercepting him before he could go further. "You came?" she said brightly, though her eyes flicked around to see who was watching. "You invited me," Samuel replied politely. A few nearby guests laughed. Evelyn lowered her voice. "This is a formal event. You should probably stay near the back." Samuel nodded. "Of course." As he moved toward the edge of the room, conversations resumed, but quieter now. Eyes followed him, judgments formed without a single word spoken. From across the ballroom, David Carter watched it all. Every look, every whisper, every smile that wasn't kind. And as the music played on, the test continued. Samuel stood exactly where Evelyn had directed him, near the back, beside a marble pillar, close enough to be seen, far enough to be ignored. Servers passed him without offering a drink. Conversations shifted whenever he stepped closer. Laughter softened, then resumed once he moved away. No one spoke directly to him, except in glances, raised brows, and half smiles. He noticed everything. A group of executives whispered nearby. "Is he lost?" one said. "No, I think he's part of some social experiment," another joked. "Well, someone should tell him this isn't a costume party." They laughed. Samuel didn't react. He simply clasped his hands in front of him and waited. Evelyn watched from across the room, satisfied. The discomfort she'd hoped for was unfolding perfectly. This was what she'd imagined, power made visible by contrast. She approached a waiter. "Why is he just standing there?" "He hasn't asked for anything, ma'am." Evelyn frowned. "Well, don't offer him champagne. This is a private event." The waiter hesitated, then nodded. From a balcony above, David observed quietly. He saw the executive who scoffed, the socialite who rolled her eyes, the investor who laughed too loudly. And he saw the few who hesitated, who seemed unsure, conflicted, uncomfortable. Time passed. The music grew louder. Speeches were announced soon. The room filled with warmth, laughter, and an unspoken agreement. Samuel did not belong. At one point, a young woman approached him, curiosity softening her face. "Hi," she said. "Are you with?" Before she could finish, Evelyn appeared at her side. "He's staff," Evelyn said sharply. "Probably wandered in." The woman flushed. "Oh, sorry." She walked away. Samuel nodded once. "No need to apologize." Evelyn leaned in, her voice sweet but sharp. "You're being very quiet," she said. "Don't be nervous." Samuel met her eyes. "I'm not." Something about his calm unsettled her. She straightened. "Enjoy the party." She turned away, missing the way several guests had begun to watch more closely now. Not just Samuel, but her. Because humiliation was easy, silence was harder, and David Carter had seen enough. He adjusted his cufflinks. It was almost time to speak. As the evening wore on, the room began to change. Not in volume, not in glamour, but in attention. A few guests started to notice something strange, not about Samuel, but about how others reacted to him. The way conversations stopped when he passed. The way eyes followed him, then quickly looked away. Near the bar, an older man in a gray suit watched Samuel thoughtfully. "He hasn't moved," he said to the woman beside him. "Not once." She nodded. "And he hasn't complained either." Across the room, a young server paused beside Samuel, lowering her voice. "Would you like some water?" she asked quietly. Samuel smiled. "That would be kind, thank you." She handed him a glass, glancing around nervously before walking away. Evelyn noticed. She tightened her jaw. From the stage, a host announced that the CEO would be speaking soon. Applause rippled through the room. David Carter stepped closer to the edge of the ballroom, eyes sweeping the crowd. He caught Samuel's gaze briefly. Samuel gave a small nod. It was time. But David waited. Because the test wasn't just about cruelty, it was about courage. As conversations resumed, a man near the center of the room cleared his throat. "You're Samuel, right?" he asked. Extending a hand, Samuel shook it. "Yes." "I'm Mark," the man said. "I just wanted to say you've been very patient tonight." Samuel's eyes softened. "Thank you." Evelyn saw the exchange and felt something she hadn't expected. Unease. Why was anyone talking to him? She crossed the room again, her heels sharp against the marble. "Mark," she said brightly, "aren't you needed near the investors?" Mark hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He walked away, casting Samuel an apologetic look. Evelyn turned to Samuel, her smile thin. "You're attracting attention," she said. "That wasn't the idea." Samuel tilted his head slightly. "Then what was?" For the first time that night, Evelyn didn't have an answer ready. Before she could respond, the music faded. The lights dimmed. David Carter stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent, and the real test was about to end. Excellent. Now we lock attention. This chapter begins the slow reveal, not the explosion yet. Chapter 7. The question no one expected. David Carter stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the polished wood. The room was silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to glow a little dimmer, as if waiting. "Thank you all for coming tonight," David began, his voice calm, steady. "This company was built on ambition, innovation, and trust." Applause followed automatically. David raised a hand, and the clapping faded. "But tonight," he continued, "is not just a celebration." Evelyn shifted slightly in her seat near the front, her smile fixed. David's eyes moved slowly across the room, lingering, not on the most powerful guests, but on the edges, on the servers, on the staff, on Samuel, standing quietly by the pillar. "Tonight," David said, "I want to ask a simple question." The silence deepened. "How many of you noticed how someone was treated this evening?" A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. People glanced at each other. Someone laughed awkwardly. David waited. Seconds stretched. No one spoke. Evelyn felt a tightening in her chest. She forced a laugh. "David, what is this?" He didn't look at her. "I'm serious," David said. "How many of you noticed?" Hands stayed down, eyes dropped. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. David nodded slowly. "Interesting." He stepped away from the podium. "Samuel," he said gently, "would you join me up here?" A sharp intake of breath swept the room. Evelyn's face drained of color. Samuel hesitated for a moment, then walked forward. Every step echoed. Whispers erupted. "What is happening? Why is the janitor going on stage? This is embarrassing." Samuel climbed the steps and stood beside David, side by side. Equal height, equal presence. David turned back to the crowd. "This man," he said, "has been in this room all night." He paused. "And many of you decided exactly who he was, without ever asking." Evelyn's heart pounded. David wasn't smiling anymore. "And now," he continued, "I'd like to talk about character." David let the silence stretch longer than was comfortable. No music, no clinking glasses, just the sound of breathing. "This evening," David said, "I watched something unfold." He paced slowly across the stage, every step deliberate. "I watched people smile, while excluding someone standing right in front of them. I watched laughter used as a shield. I watched silence become a weapon." A few guests shifted in their seats. "I also watched something else," he continued. "A few small acts of decency. A glass of water, a handshake, a pause before judgment." David turned toward Samuel. "This man didn't ask for attention. He didn't complain. He didn't defend himself." Samuel stood calmly, hands folded behind his back. Evelyn felt heat rush to her face. "This is getting out of hand," she whispered to the woman beside her. David's gaze finally found her. "Is it?" he asked evenly. The room stiffened. David gestured gently toward Samuel. "Tell me," he said to the crowd, "what did you see when you looked at him tonight?" A voice spoke up hesitantly from the back. "A janitor." Another added, more quietly, "Staff." David nodded. "That's what you thought you saw." He paused. "But what you really saw was your reflection." A murmur rippled through the room. David straightened. "Tonight was not an accident," he said. "It was intentional." Evelyn's breath caught. "This party," David continued, "was a test." The word landed hard. "I wanted to know how people behave when they believe no one important is watching." Eyes widened. "And you showed me." David took a breath. "Some of you passed." He gestured subtly toward the server, the older man at the bar, the young woman who had hesitated earlier. "And some of you." His eyes returned to Evelyn, failed. The silence became unbearable. Evelyn stood abruptly. "David, stop this. You're embarrassing everyone." David didn't raise his voice. "No," he said, "I'm revealing them." And for the first time that night, the power in the room shifted. Here it comes. This chapter tightens the noose before the final reveal. Here is Chapter 9, written to spike suspense and emotional tension. Chapter 9, The Name That Changed Everything. David reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document. The rustle of paper sounded unnaturally loud in the silent ballroom. "Before anyone leaves," he said, "there's something else you need to understand." Evelyn remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides. "This man," David continued, "was not chosen randomly." He unfolded the paper slowly, eyes never leaving the crowd. Samuel Reed. A few guests glanced at each other. The name meant nothing to them. Yet, David turned to Samuel. "May I?" Samuel nodded once. David faced the room again. "Samuel Reed has been with this company longer than most of you have known its name." A murmur rippled. "He cleaned floors when we couldn't afford an office, fixed broken doors when we couldn't hire contractors, showed up when others walked away." Evelyn's heart raced. "That doesn't make him special," she snapped. "It makes him loyal." David met her stare calmly. "It makes him essential." The room fell silent again. What most of you don't know, David said, is that before this company had investors, before it had a board, before it had a future. He paused. It had two people. Samuel's jaw tightened. David lifted his gaze, and one of them was Samuel Reed. Gasps filled the room. Evelyn's face went pale. David let the shock settle. This company exists because of decisions made in rooms like this, by people willing to judge wisely, he said. And tonight, some of you proved you can't. Evelyn whispered. That's not true. David didn't respond, because the most devastating truth hadn't been spoken yet. David didn't rush. He let the room sit with the shock of what he'd just revealed. Before there were boardrooms, he said quietly, there was a storage unit. The guests leaned in without realizing it. No heat, no windows, just two folding chairs and a borrowed desk. David turned slightly toward Samuel. Samuel was the one who believed when no one else did. A projector screen behind them flickered on. An old photograph appeared, grainy, faded. Two men sat in a cramped room, one younger, one older. Samuel, gasps echoed again. That was taken 19 years ago, David said. The night our first contract fell through. He swallowed. I was ready to quit. The image changed. Another photo. Late nights, handwritten notes, coffee cups stacked high. Samuel cleaned offices by day, David continued, and stayed up with me by night, planning, advising, questioning every decision. Evelyn's knees felt weak. You never told me this, she whispered. David finally looked at her. You never asked. The room went still. Samuel didn't want credit, David said. He didn't want attention. He wanted the company to survive. Samuel spoke for the first time, his voice steady. I believed in the idea, he said simply. David nodded. When success came, Samuel stepped back, he continued. Not because he had to, because he trusted me. A heavy pause. And tonight, David said, you saw what happens when people are judged by appearance instead of substance. He turned to Samuel. Stand here with me. Samuel stepped forward. The room felt smaller now, tighter, because the truth wasn't just uncomfortable. It was irreversible. Excellent. Now we turn the spotlight on consequences. Here is Chapter 11, heavy, emotional, and gripping. Chapter 11. The cost of being seen. David exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of restraint. There's something else, he said. The room braced itself. Tonight wasn't just about observing behavior, David continued. It was about accountability. Evelyn's hands trembled. David looked toward the crowd. Leadership isn't about wealth, he said. It's about how you treat people when you think nothing is at stake. He turned toward a group of executives near the front. Some of you laughed, he said calmly. Some of you looked away. No names, no shouting, just truth. That tells me exactly who I can trust. He paused, then nodded toward Samuel. Samuel has never raised his voice, never demanded respect, and yet he has earned it more than anyone in this room. Applause began softly, then stopped. David raised his hand. This isn't a moment for clapping, he said. It's a moment for reflection. Evelyn stepped forward suddenly. This is unfair, she said, her voice cracking. You set everyone up. David met her eyes. I gave everyone a choice. The words landed like a verdict. You chose mockery, he continued. Others chose kindness. Evelyn shook her head. It was a joke. David's voice softened. Jokes reveal truth. The crowd remained frozen. David straightened. Effective immediately, he said. Several leadership positions will be re-evaluated. Murmurs exploded. No decisions tonight, David added, but some of you will not be returning to these rooms. Fear spread through the ballroom. David turned back to Samuel. Samuel, he said quietly, thank you for standing. Samuel nodded, eyes thoughtful. Evelyn felt something collapse inside her. For the first time in her life, status didn't protect her, and she knew, deep down, this wasn't over. Perfect. Now we slow it down again and go personal. Here is Chapter 12, built to deepen emotion and keep viewers locked in. Chapter 12. Behind closed eyes. The ballroom slowly emptied. Not with laughter, not with music, but with quiet footsteps and lowered heads. Guests avoided eye contact as they passed Samuel. Some nodded respectfully, others looked ashamed. No one laughed now. Evelyn stood frozen near the front row, watching the power she once controlled slip through her fingers. David stepped down from the stage. Samuel, he said quietly, please give us a moment. Samuel nodded and walked toward the exit, his footsteps calm, measured, unchanged. As soon as he was gone, Evelyn turned on David. You humiliated me, she said, her voice shaking. In front of everyone. David didn't raise his voice. You humiliated yourself, he replied. She laughed bitterly. You used me. This whole thing was planned. David sighed. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of disbelief. I was protecting our image, she said. People like him don't belong in rooms like this. David looked at her the way one looks at a stranger. That room exists because of him. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she had nothing to say. You didn't fail because you mocked him, David continued. You failed because, when given the chance to show kindness, you chose cruelty. Silence stretched between them. What happens now? Evelyn whispered. David looked toward the door Samuel had exited through. Now, he said, I decide who I'm building with. Evelyn's breath caught. You'd choose him over me? David met her gaze steadily. I already did. The words landed harder than any public accusation. Evelyn turned away, shoulders shaking. Behind her, David stood still, not triumphant, not angry, just resolved, because leadership required sacrifice. And tonight, he had chosen integrity over image. Beautiful. Now we give the audience emotional release mixed with anticipation. Samuel stepped out into the cool night air. The noise of the city felt distant after the weight of the ballroom. He paused at the edge of the hotel steps, breathing deeply, as if grounding himself. He hadn't planned to say much tonight. He hadn't planned to say anything at all. Yet here he was, seen, named, exposed in ways he never asked for. A black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down. Get in, David said softly. Samuel hesitated, then opened the door and slid into the seat. They rode in silence for a few moments, the city lights passing like memories. I didn't know you still remembered, Samuel said finally. David let out a short breath. I never forgot. He glanced at Samuel. You didn't have to do this. Samuel smiled faintly. Yes, I did. David frowned. Why? Samuel looked out the window. Because character doesn't show up when it's announced. It shows up when it's tested. David nodded slowly. You passed, he said. Samuel shook his head. No, I already knew who you were. The car stopped at a quiet street. David turned toward him. What happens now? Samuel thought for a moment. Now, he said, you finish what we started. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Then let's finish it together. Samuel opened it. Inside was a document. Thick, official. He didn't need to read the whole thing. The heading said enough. Evelyn Carter watched from the hotel entrance as the car disappeared into traffic. For the first time that night, she realized something far more frightening than humiliation. She had misjudged not just a man. She had misjudged the future. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. Samuel sat quietly in the back seat as David drove through nearly empty streets. The city had begun to settle, but Samuel's thoughts had not. He opened the document carefully. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a bonus. It was a legal agreement. Restoration of equity and position. Samuel's breath caught. This is, he began. Overdue, David finished. You walked away when the company needed a clean image, David said. You stayed when it needed a clean conscience. Samuel shook his head. I never wanted this. David glanced at him. I know. That's why you deserve it. They drove in silence again. The next morning, the company buzzed with rumors. Phones rang nonstop. Emails flooded inboxes. Stories spread. Some exaggerated, some painfully accurate. By noon, the boardroom was full. David stood at the head of the table. Samuel sat beside him. No janitor's uniform, no borrowed suit, just presence. This meeting is about direction, David said calmly, and correction. A screen lit up behind him. Samuel Reed's name appeared. Co-founder, board member, gasps echoed. Outside the room, Evelyn watched through the glass walls. Her reflection stared back at her. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, and a hollow look she didn't recognize. She pressed her hand to the glass. Inside, David spoke words she could barely hear. We build with integrity, he said, or we don't build at all. And just like that, the future shifted. Not loudly, not violently, but permanently. When the story went public by morning, the silence was gone. News outlets ran headlines filled with speculation. Social media erupted with clips, leaked photos, and blurred videos from the night before. Comment sections filled with arguments, praise, and outrage. CEO exposes elite hypocrisy at private gala. Janitor revealed as company co-founder. A party that changed everything. Inside the company, tension crackled through the hallways. Employees whispered. Executives avoided each other. People who had laughed the night before now spoke carefully, measuring every word. Samuel walked through the lobby unnoticed no longer. Some nodded respectfully, others looked away. A few stopped him to shake his hand, unsure what to say. He accepted it all with quiet grace. Evelyn watched from her office as her name trended for the wrong reasons. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Sponsors sent polite messages asking for distance. She stared at her phone, scrolling, searching for a version of the story where she wasn't the villain. There wasn't one. That afternoon, David called a company-wide meeting. The auditorium filled quickly. "This organization will not be defined by titles," David said from the stage. "It will be defined by conduct." Samuel stood beside him, not elevated, not hidden. "From today forward," David continued, "respect is not optional." Applause followed, real this time. Evelyn sat alone in the back row. For the first time, she understood what Samuel had felt the night before. Invisible. And now the hardest part remained. Not public judgment, but private reckoning. Samuel found her in the garden. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low, casting long shadows across the manicured hedges behind the corporate building. Evelyn sat alone on a stone bench, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look up when he approached. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly. Samuel stopped a few steps away. "I didn't think you'd ask." She laughed softly, without humor. "I didn't ask." Silence settled between them. Finally, Evelyn looked up. Her eyes were tired, stripped of their usual sharpness. "I need to know something," she said. "Did you enjoy it?" Samuel frowned slightly. "Enjoy what?" "Watching me fall," she replied. He shook his head. "No." She searched his face, looking for a lie. "I didn't come to be seen," Samuel continued. "I came because your husband asked me to help him see others clearly." Evelyn swallowed. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Samuel's voice remained calm. "That's the problem. You didn't think it would." She looked away. "I built my life on being untouchable," she said, "on being above judgment." Samuel nodded slowly. "No one is above it." Her shoulders sagged. "What do I do now?" Samuel considered the question carefully. "You start by seeing people," he said, "not positions, not uniforms. People." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Samuel didn't move closer. "I believe you," he said, "but apology isn't the end. It's the beginning." He turned to leave. "Samuel," Evelyn called out. He paused. "You didn't humiliate me," she said. "You showed me." Samuel nodded once and walked away. Weeks passed. The company didn't collapse. It didn't explode either. It adjusted. Hallways felt different now. Executives greeted receptionists by name. Meetings began with pauses instead of interruptions. Power spoke more softly. Samuel returned to the building, but not to the janitor's closet. His office was modest, glass walls, a simple desk, no plaques. He asked for no announcement. People found out anyway. Some came to apologize, others came to ask questions. Samuel listened more than he spoke. Evelyn kept her distance. She watched change from the edges, seeing staff meetings she no longer attended, conversations she was no longer part of. One afternoon, she noticed something small. A junior employee dropped a stack of papers. Without thinking, she bent down to help. The employee froze, shocked. "Thank you," the woman whispered. Evelyn nodded, surprised by the warmth of the moment. It wasn't applause, but it was real. David watched the company from a distance, content but vigilant. "You were right," he told Samuel one evening. "Tests don't end, they repeat." Samuel smiled faintly. That's how growth works. The city outside buzzed with life, unaware of the quiet shift taking place inside those walls. Because the biggest changes are rarely loud. They happen when no one is watching. The next time the company hosted an event, it wasn't announced with glittering invitations or whispered exclusivity. It was simple, clean, intentional. The same ballroom, the same chandeliers, but the room felt different. Samuel stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. Not as security, not as staff, just as himself. People greeted him back, some warmly, some nervously, but no one ignored him. David watched from a distance, hands in his pockets. "This room used to measure people," he said quietly. "Now it listens." Samuel nodded, only because it learned the cost of not listening. Across the room, Evelyn entered. No red dress, no commanding presence, just a calm posture and uncertain steps. She hesitated when she saw Samuel, then approached him. "Good evening," she said. "Good evening," he replied. No tension, no drama, just acknowledgement. As the night unfolded, conversations flowed differently. Titles mattered less, stories mattered more. Laughter wasn't sharp, it was shared. David took the microphone briefly. "No speeches tonight," he said. "Just gratitude. Applause, not forced, not polite. Real." Samuel looked around the room one last time. This was never about revenge, it was about reflection. And reflection, once seen, can't be unseen. Long after the lights dimmed and the guests left, the lesson lingered. People carried it with them, into cars, into homes, into quiet moments where status no longer spoke for them. An executive sat alone that night, replaying the way he had laughed. A server remembered the glass of water she had offered and smiled. A young employee thought about how easy it had been to judge and how hard it now felt to forget. Samuel walked home instead of taking a car. The city air was cool, familiar, honest. He passed storefronts closing for the night, janitors locking doors, security guards nodding politely, people who worked without applause. He saw them. At home, he sat by the window and reflected, not on what he had gained, but on what had been revealed. Power hadn't changed anyone. It had simply removed the mask. Across town, Evelyn stood in front of a mirror, not fixing her hair, not adjusting her clothes, just looking. For the first time, she asked herself a question no one had forced her to ask before. Who am I when no one is impressed by me? There was no answer yet, but there was honesty. And honesty, she realized, was terrifying and necessary. The world outside moved on quickly. Another scandal replaced theirs, another story took attention. But inside those who were there that night, something remained, a quiet awareness, a reminder that someday, somewhere, everyone stands in a room where kindness is the only currency, and the bill always comes due. Years later, no one remembered the exact music that played that night. They remembered the silence, the moment the room realized it had been seen. Samuel Reed never spoke about the party in interviews. When asked, he simply said, "It wasn't about me." And he meant it. The company continued to grow, not just in profit but in principle. New leaders were chosen carefully. Promotions came with one unspoken rule: character first. David Carter stepped down from daily leadership eventually, leaving behind something rare, an organization built on respect instead of fear. And Evelyn? She never returned to that ballroom, but she returned to herself, slowly, uncomfortably, honestly. She learned to listen before speaking, to see before judging, to treat people as if they mattered, because they did. No one applauded her for that, but something else happened. People trusted her again. Samuel kept his office simple: a desk, a chair, a window. From there, he watched the world without needing to be above it. Because the truth is this: every person will one day stand in a room where power means nothing, where titles fall silent, where only character speaks. And when that moment comes, it won't matter who you were invited as, only how you treated the ones you thought didn't belong. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful real-life stories, and comment below, what would you have done in that room?